Hello. Today I will tell you why it is not recommended to play GTA San Andreas with a high frame rate, and how to get rid of bugs with high FPS. As you know, computers are getting more powerful and older games come with very high FPS. But because of this, many players began to notice strange sensations while playing GTA San Andreas with a high FPS. Unpleasant bugs appear, as well as the difficulty of passing some missions. In this video, I specifically set low quality textures and low draw distance so that I could show you these bugs in the game with high FPS. One of the most annoying problems with high FPS is a very slow swimming of CJ. It feels like CJ has forgotten how to swim. The higher the FPS in the game, the slower the CJ will swim. It is also impossible to dive normally underwater. This is noticeable in the triathlon, where all the rivals, including CJ, swim very slowly. But after that, your rivals will be ahead of you, and you will remain the last, and it becomes extremely hardcore to complete the triathlon. By the way, perhaps some players will remember the remaster of GTA San Andreas, where CJ also swims there slowly than in the original version. But in fact, it's not about the high FPS, but because of a bug in the remaster of the game. It is even immediately clear that my emulator is strictly 30 FPS. The next bug in the game, which occurs due to the high FPS, is the broken transport control. Due to the high FPS, absolutely all cars turn very slowly. It feels like the mass of cars has increased. And also these cars go a little slower than at 30 FPS. And yet, all the cars stop by themselves. Yes, it is. Try it, it's pretty funny. The same thing happens with bikes. They also stop by themselves, but for some reason they have normal control. Boats with high FPS have a problem with acceleration as opposed to 30 FPS. The next nasty bug with high FPS, you can find at Ganton's gym. When you enter the interior and you come to some exercise, you cannot do it. No matter how hard you try to press the enter key every time, the game will not let you do the exercise, and the menu with a choice of weight will simply disappear by itself. In fact, this bug works when you have 400 FPS or more. Below 400 FPS this bug will not work. But if you press the shift key very quickly, then you can do the exercise. Also, do not make unique jumps with high FPS. Why? Because if you make a unique jump, the camera will just freeze in place. As a result, the camera will stand still along with the slow motion. But then after a while, the camera will still return to CJ. Perhaps you were pissed off by a bug with a strange heart attack from CJ when you wanted to take the wonderful Tech 9 from the roof of Sweet's house, but you could not do it because CJ dies stupidly, moving over a small obstacle, and you end up in the hospital. But in fact, this bug works absolutely wherever there is a small obstacle. For example, a bench at the train station in San Fierro. The reason for the bug is that when CJ climbs over a small obstacle, then CJ's health begins to decrease rapidly. Therefore, be careful. The siren in some transports was a necessary thing. It was necessary for stupid traffic to let you in when you have a difficult situation. For example, if some clown on Grove Street stole your mom's blender. Unfortunately, when the FPS is high, the sirens in police cars do not work. Also, sirens do not work on fire trucks and ambulances. As you hear and see, instead of a siren, there is a simple horn from cars. Of course, Some even manage to sound a siren even at 200 FPS. But this is very difficult to do. It is necessary to press the H button very often to trigger the siren. Also, when playing with a high FPS, forget about such a thing as movement from any weapon while aiming. It does not work.
My God, you one ugly bitch.
With a high FPS, cars cannot close their doors. This can be seen as CJ tries to close the door, but succeeds only the second time. Of course, it will be sad if you cannot scale the map in the game menu because of the high FPS. It will be very difficult to do this. With high FPS, traffic beeps will play very quickly.
Take a piss!
And this is how traffic beeps sound at normal frame rates.
Move, please!
It is also not recommended to enter and exit the interiors every time, as the game may crash due to high frame rates. So we talked about some of the problems of high FPS during the game. Let's go into high frame rate bugs during missions. Yes, there are missions that are either possible to pass but with difficulty, or impossible to pass, which many players often write in forums about problems with these missions. One of such missions, which at a high frame rate was completely impossible to pass, was the driving school. One of the tests, alley-oop, where you have to get over the standing cars and land straight. With a high FPS, you will not be able to fly and land 100% correctly. Reason: broken physics of the car with a high frame rate, which I mentioned earlier. Many players have complained about this issue in the forums, and the only solution to this problem was to enable frame limiting. After that, the mission could finally be completed normally. If you think this is just one mission that is difficult to complete at high frame rates, you are deeply mistaken. The next mission is Amphibious Assault, in which you need to swim and dive through checkpoints, and then kill Danang boys in the ship and plant a bug. If you know in advance about the terrible swimming of CJ at high FPS, as well as the impossible diving underwater, then it will be very difficult to complete this mission. In these problematic cases, you can easily get stuck in textures and then die from a lack of oxygen. Although sometimes, you can still get out, but the chance is unlikely. In the next mission Fender Ketchup, where we need to scare the guy tied to the hood of our car, with a high FPS there is a bug with the garage. The fact is that the garage closes earlier in this cutscene. CJ will eventually get stuck, and he will try to get out. In short, we were locked up. But on the other hand, you can skip the cutscene by pressing shift. Although it is unlikely that the players knew about the skipping of the cutscene a couple of days after the game was released on PC. A lot of players have also posted on the forums about this shit with CJ getting stuck in this cutscene. Again, we turn on the frame limiter and that's it. The garage will close much later. As you can see from a different angle, at first the garage opens and a dialogue takes place. After CJ enters the car and drives off, the garage will close immediately when CJ starts to move. Hike. Some scripts in missions work much faster and earlier than necessary. In the additional mission of the fireman, if, for example, you decide to complete the game 100%, when you start shooting with water and extinguishing the fire, then due to the high FPS, a bug with a stream of water occurs, so the water dissolves on the spot. But in my case, the water still flies, but the jet cannot fly further, so each time you have to approach close to the car and start shooting with water. In short, some effects are broken in games. The same can be done with the fire extinguisher, where the foam effect is visible in the original, but with a high FPS, the foam effect is gone. The foam also dissolves on sight. Thus, it will be difficult to complete. For example, the mission Burning Desire, where you have to put out the fire every time and get out of here from the burning house. After all, you will be putting out the fire for a long time due to bugs with effects. But those who have even more FPS, then there is a possibility that the fire will not be extinguished at all, as well as the water that will not run out of the fire truck. Now let's move on to the pluses of a high FPS. Yes, you may be surprised, but these advantages are there. For example, you can paint overall graffiti with a spray can in 1 second, as opposed to the normal frame rate, where you would have to spend a couple of seconds on it. Thus, the spray can transform into a lethal weapon that kills opponents in a matter of seconds. Helicopters with a high FPS take off instantly, unlike the original, where you also had to prepare for tequila for a long time. During a date with a girl, when you decide to give her a ride in a car with a high FPS, you will make this date much faster. The indicator that adds to the fun fills up very quickly. This will save you a few seconds.
Completely worthless, don't you think?
Really?
The same trick with the indicator happens with the mission catalyst, where you have to throw boxes from the train to rider. The trick is that the indicator will also fill up very quickly, so you will always throw boxes very heavily.
Shit, I nearly dropped. They're trying to kill me. Okay, CJ, that's all I can carry. Hop in the car and stab out, fool.
This also works with the Fender Ketchup mission.
Too bad! What are you doing now? The family.
With a high FPS, you will move cars very easily. It feels like these cars have decreased mass, which looks funny, and you control pedestrians.
That's mine.
If you want to jump from a parachute, then at this moment CJ will rotate unrealistically fast. I wonder how his head is not dizzy from this. Lol. So we talked about all the pros and cons of a high FPS in GTA San Andreas. Perhaps you are asking the question, is it possible to fix all these bugs? Naturally, you need to turn on the frame limiter, but is it necessary to play 30 FPS in GTA San Andreas in 2020? No. If you have Bandicam, then you can block FPS at 60 FPS at this point, so you can play absolutely 60 FPS. But if this option does not suit you, then I recommend installing this mod, which, although not fixing everything, fixes the incorrect behavior of the transport, as well as slow swimming, and other small bugs. But that's all. Thank you all for watching, homies.